So yesterday we were talking about the interruptions that, although seem surprising, nevertheless, there are certain situations where a person either can make an interruption or should. Of course, there's a discussion here. If a person did not feed his animals, would that be a obligation for the person to interrupt, or if he interrupted, it's okay? In other words, our Gemara says that if a person interrupted, he doesn't have to repeat the bracha. But should a person interrupt? And the same question would apply. Person doesn't have salt. Person has bread that needs salt. It's not like our bread today. And if he didn't have salt, so our Gemara says you don't have to repeat the bracha. Again, you said the bracha hamaitzi and you interrupted. You didn't eat anything. You didn't eat it yet. You quickly called person in the kitchen and said, "Could you please bring salt?" So in that situation, our Gemara says you don't have to repeat the hamaitzi bracha, and it's okay. You're fine. You don't repeat the hamaitzi bracha, and it's okay. But what happens in the first before you actually call to the kitchen to bring salt? Should you be doing that? Is that the preferable thing to do? Should you be asking for salt, or is it better if you don't? But if you happen to have done it, then it's okay. And this is really a topic of discussion among the rabbis. In the Shulchan Aruch, it says that Mikol Makayim, nevertheless, preferably one should not interrupt. And this is the Ramah in chapter 167. It says, however, preferably one should not interrupt at all. So that's the preferable thing. And then in the Bir Halacha, he brings down that even regarding feeding animals, it might be preferable not to feed the animal. Now, that's questionable because there is another source where it says feeding the animal is a biblical prohibition to eat before feeding the animal. And according to that, you have to interrupt in order to feed the animals, even after you recited a bracha. Now, so it seems like there's an argument there. And the other scenario where you don't have salt, and it's talking about the bread in the olden days where they didn't have salt in the bread. So that also seems like it might be a topic of debate, because the simple way of reading the Shulchan Aruch is that preferably you shouldn't interrupt at all, and that implies, when you don't have salt and you just eat the bread without salt, and maybe afterwards you bring salt or something. Let me mute everyone here.
Robert, you have to mute.
Okay, so now on the other hand, the Gemara says that Rava Bar Shmuel said in the name of Reb Chia, you're not allowed to cut the bread until you bring salt or relish before everyone. So from that statement in the Gemara, it does seem like it's quite important to have the salt. So there might be room to say that's also it doesn't say it's biblical, it's not biblical, but from the Gemara, it does seem like it's important. So how would we explain that based on the Ramah here says l'chatchila, don't interrupt at all. So the Mishnah Berurah seems to want to say that these are all cases of only after the fact. Only after the fact, you don't have to repeat the bracha, but really preferably you don't. That doesn't mean that you should interrupt the bracha to do that. That's the way he's learning. So that's the way the Mishnah Berurah is learning. It is, it is interesting because, it is interesting because we saw the Tosfos yesterday, and the Tosfos brings this medrash about how the Satan could be, creating the prosecution against us. And we don't have mitzvahs, and the salt is what's going to protect us. And so it would seem from there like it's quite important to have salt on the table. But never, it's better, preferable not to, but it's not, after the fact, it's not a problem. So that's what it seems like from the Mishnah Berurah. Better just, don't interrupt. Now, the question really is, what about if you don't say it, but just to get the salt? So that doesn't seem to be so much of an issue, even though you're interrupting with time. You're spending time to go get the salt, or you're hinting, but you're not actually saying it, which preferably you shouldn't do that either. Preferably the salt should be on the table beforehand. But in this scenario, at least you're not saying anything. So it would seem like that shouldn't be a problem. Of course, we'll have to look into that and make sure. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say part of the blessing that we do is because we're going to enjoy that food. But without salt, you're not really going to enjoy that bread. So the thing is that there's two levels of enjoyment. There's on the one hand, you're enjoying having food that has a taste. It doesn't have the best taste, but it has a taste. It has some flavor. It's nourishing. So it would seem like as long as it has some flavor, then it's considered except you recite a bracha. You're obligated in a bracha as long as there is some taste to it. Water is really where there's an issue. There's no officially water doesn't have a taste, and so therefore only if you're thirsty you recite a bracha on the water. Well, these days they add stuff to the water too.
Right,
So.
That's a good question. Maybe water has a certain flavor to it. Yes, Susan.
Okay, I'm a little confused. The table is supposed to be like the altar was in ancient times, and the salt is to protect us from the Yetzer Hara or from Satan, or is this the same thing?
So we explained yesterday that when we're sitting there with nothing, with waiting around with no mitzvah, because we're not doing anything but waiting till the host says the bracha. So that's an opportune time for Satan to make some prosecution against us. So then if we have salt on the table, it protects us because it makes the table similar to the altar, and it's a time where it creates atonement for the Jewish people.
Because we're not doing a mitzvah. We're not in an active way doing anything.
Right.
That's what okay, now I get it. Thank you.
Now, there are other scenarios. Yeah, Rabbi, yes, David, yes.
I was going to say that based on the second reason, a person can say, well, it's not really an interruption because it's an integral part of making hamotzi on the bread. But based on the first reason, because I want a little flavor, I could use mustard, I could use ketchup, I could use anything. Why salt? So that's why to do it for taste seems like an interruption. To do it for the second reason, which has to do with what Susan spoke about, that doesn't seem like an interruption. It seems like a integral part of the blessing of the Amosi.
Right. Interesting what you're saying, but the idea here is that reciting a bracha on something that's more flavorful does enhance the bracha. So you could say as well as, that Ben's point is also an important thing for the bracha. And the fact is, it is considered a tzorech for the hamoitzi or for the meal. There are different opinions in the commentaries if it needs to be a necessity for the hamoitzi part of the bread or for in general for the meal. But once it falls into that category, it's not considered a hefset. But that doesn't mean you should do it. So the idea that we're seeing here, at least the way the Mishnah Berurah is learning it, based on the Ramah, the Mishnah Berurah's explanation of the Ramah and the Ramah's statement, is that we try to minimize as much as possible, even when it's a necessity for the meal. We try to minimize it as much as possible. And a person should try to prepare in advance all those, to cover themselves. Now, there are a few other examples. So one serious example that I mentioned is in his source of an argument is the case where you didn't feed your animals first. Another example is, let's say you didn't separate in Israel. If you don't separate the truma and meiser from the food and you set a bracha on it already. So that would be an example where you're really stuck. On the one hand, you can't, you're not supposed to eat food that you didn't separate the truma and the meiser from. And on the other hand, you don't want to interrupt from the bracha interrupt from the bracha to eating it. So I saw them bring down that it is acceptable to recite to separate the truma and meiser. It's a necessity, for eating. Another example would be if a person made a vow never to have, let's say, never to have food with sugar in it or something, some desserts, and they already recited the bracha. The question is, can they be matir neder? Can they annul the vow after they recited a bracha mezainos? Can they annul the vow and then be able to eat it? So they made a vow they're not going to have desserts, and now they recited a bracha on it. Now they remembered, I'm not allowed to have this. Can you annul the vow and eat it? Would that be considered a tzorech, a necessity to annul the vow in order to eat it? So that's another example I saw brought down in one of the commentaries on the Tosfos Harosh here. They bring down this example.
I thought you needed the Rav or somebody to annul it.
Yeah, so you either you have the Rav there, or you have to arrange three. Well, not a Rav. You need three men. So you quickly get three men. So
and do what without a hafsaka? No.
You're really you guys are really confused.
No, you have to say it. You have to say the words, but that's a necessity in order to eat this mezainos. You need to say, I regret making this neder. Can you be matir my neder? Just like you're saying, feed the animals and bring salt. You're saying you're actually saying it. No, of course you're saying.
I remember my father, Lava Shalom. The only time I really remember like one word things is when he would stand at the table and go, Melech or Sakin. Those are the two times you heard two Hebrew words. Because he would say the minimum that he had to get us to break.
Interesting. Now I do want to mention that there is an alshich that says about feeding feeding the animals, that the reason why a person should not eat before feeding the animals is he gives a Hasidic interpretation here of Moshe Alshich. He says that regarding the food, we want to elevate all four elements in the world to completion. And the only way to do that is to elevate them from below to above. And therefore, we are commanded, and he quotes our Gemara, that before a person eats, he's got to feed his animal, like it says in the pasuk, "V'nasati esev b'sadecha levehemtecha." You give food you give the grasses or the herbs from your field to your animals, and afterwards it says, "And you will eat and be satisfied." And the goal is to elevate first the vegetation, the tzomeach, things that grow. You have to elevate vegetation to the Baal Chai, to the animals. In other words, when an animal eats produce, what's happening is the animal elevates the produce to the level of Chai, to the level of animal. So he takes Tzomeach and he eats it. He takes something that grows and he eats it, and it becomes part of the animal. So he's elevating the life of vegetation to the life of animal life, and then it's elevated to when the person eats the animal, it gets elevated to become a human. So what happens in the world, in the different levels of life, you have inanimate, you have vegetation, you have animal life, and then you have human life. So ultimately, in order to bring the world to completion, we have to eat animals that have eaten vegetation, and ultimately we're bringing everything up to the highest, we're bringing everything to completion because it becomes part of the human, it becomes part of our body. So the idea of feeding the animals first is that the way to elevate the world is you have to go from below to above. First, the animal has to eat the vegetation, and then the human can eat the animal, and then everything becomes part of human life. We're bringing everything up to the highest level possible, and after the person after hazanas haguf, after the man is satiated from everything that's below him, then the words of Torah give life to the soul. That gives satiation to the soul, and everything reaches its purpose, as has been spoken, as he mentioned earlier. So that's the words of the Rav Moshe Alshich explaining explaining this Gemara. Yes, Ben.
I need really clarification on, is it every time that we say a moitzi that we have to worry about the animals eating, or any time you eat anything?
So
It's
it
one
seems
question.
to be, well, there seems to be a contradiction in the Gemaras. There's a Gemara, in our Gemara says it's prohibited to eat, but the Gemara in Gittin says prohibited to taste anything before you feed the animals. So this contradiction.
Is it once a day or all day long?
No, so that's the thing, that the animals don't have, just because you eat a certain amount of times a day, you have to, the point is you have to consider them before you eat. Are they okay? So the main thing is you should, before you eat anything, you should think in your mind, are the animals hungry?
Okay.
So it's not actually feeding them, it's acknowledging that you're responsible for them, and deciding if it's time for them, if they should have food now, if they need to eat. But obviously, I guess in the morning, there's no question. The first thing in the day, they're probably hungry. That would be a no-brainer that they in that scenario, you have to feed them first. But in the future, the rest of the day, it would seem to be more of a thought process. Do I need to feed them now or not?
The other question is, if you are like Naval that has thousands of animals,
Right.
what kind of hefsek can you do to wait for the animals to eat before you eat the bread?
What do you think? What would you advise?
I would advise to feed them very early in the morning, but if they didn't, you know.
I would advise to hire a lot of workers.
Okay.
And
Thousands
you hire
of
a lot of
workers, I
workers.
guess.
What? You're
Hundreds
all set.
of thousands of workers, yeah.
That's what you need. You got to do it. Listen,
Okay.
you don't have to hire them full day, part-time job. You know?
Okay.
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
But, yeah, he should be happy. He's got all these animals, you know, he should be thrilled.
Yeah, I don't, but Naval had them.
I'm not jealous of him.
He
Okay.
was punished for a lot of things.
Another example of a shaila would be if a person did not recite Havdalah and they sat down to eat and they recited a bracha on the food and then they remembered that they forgot Havdalah. Should they make Havdalah or not? And there is one view that says that person should recite Havdalah and recite a new bracha on the food. And he says it's different than Gabil Laturi, which is a Isser D'Oraisa. Gabil Laturi, giving the animals food, that's a prohibition, that's a biblical prohibition. But here, reciting Havdalah, I guess he's following the view that it's rabbinic. And he says you can't eat before it, so you should recite Havdalah first, but then you'll have to recite another bracha. Now that's a very surprising opinion, but I don't see it discussed to see if others. I would assume that others would argue with that, but that's the Ritzvah.
Say what? What would they say? Just keep eating?
No, that you don't have to repeat the bracha. This is a necessity in order to eat. You need to say Havdalah.
Right.
And therefore, you recite Havdalah first and continue, and then eat whatever you made the bracha on earlier, because this is a necessity. Now, it is a little surprising. It is going to be a little funny because here, what you're doing is you're actually drinking wine. You're saying after you said a bracha on your, let's say, mezainos.
You say Havdalah, you mean with the Borei Priyagotin or just Hamadu Ben Kaddish L'chol?
No, I guess you need to say Havdalah properly. What are you going to do? Do a half of Havdalah? I guess you need to do it. So maybe
the whole Havdalah is everything except the wine and even the nair. It's the essence is the paragraph Hamadu Ben Kaddish L'chol.
No, I understand. But I don't know that you can, just say it with the bracha without the Borei Priyagofen. It's part of the established Havdalah, and if so, you would say Havdalah. And this opinion that he brings is that you would need to recite another bracha. But he doesn't say the reason why you need to repeat another bracha is because in between your bracha of your mezainos, let's say that you're eating, you interrupted with a hagafen bracha and drank, and now you want to jump back to your earlier bracha. That's not the problem here. He says the problem here is that Gevila Tayri is an Isser D'Oraisa, you can't eat before your animal. But Havdalah is only a drabanan, so it's not as big of a necessity, and therefore it wouldn't. The interruption would not be would not be a good enough exception. But it seems surprising to me that would be the only view, because there definitely is room to learn our Gemara that these are not necessities really. They are. The purposes of them is for the meal, but they're not major necessities. For example, there is a view that says that you are allowed to taste food before you. There is a view you're allowed to taste food before you feed your animals, and because you're allowed to taste food before your animals. The fact that our Gemara says, if you say give food to the animals, shows that even though you would be allowed to take a bite, but since it's a necessity for the meal, since it's part of the necessity of eating is feeding the animals, you could say that you don't have to repeat the bracha. So that would imply to me that even in cases where where it's not a d'oraisa, it's not a biblical obligation, but the fact is this is a need for the meal, and even though you could get around it, you could have taken a little bite according to some opinions, but nevertheless, it's not considered an interruption. And here also maybe that you're not supposed to eat before Havdalah, but it's a necessity to say Havdalah. But I have to see if anyone clearly argues on that. Okay, just sharing some thoughts and connecting the Gemara to practical cases. Now I guess we can go back to the what we learned yesterday. I did want to mention yesterday we mentioned about the Reish Galusa, the political leader of the time. And I mentioned, it seems to me like they might have had some scholars as well. It wasn't just political leaders. And I looked it up, and it turns out that, and the reason I mentioned that is because our Gemara implies like they were discussing the bracha here. It's not just some political leader. It says, go eat, enjoy, he gave them food. Actually, they got into a little debate. Said, you're retracting from your opinion. Sounds like it was someone knowledgeable that he's discussing a halachic issue here, this Reish Galusa. So, he came to the Reish Galusa's house and he gave him bread. He's discussing, why did you do it this way? You should have done it that way. Why didn't you wait for salt or ask for salt? So what it seems like is the Reish Galusa was quite knowledgeable. And what I saw is that, there were a number of Reish Galusas that were quite scholarly. And in fact, at the time of Rava Bar Shmuel, there were a few Talmudic scholars that were Reish Galusas, like Mar Ukva might have been the Reish Galusa at that time, and he was right in the same generation as Shmuel. We're dealing with Rava Bar Shmuel, and additionally there was a Rav Kahana that was a Reish Galusa, and there was the brother of Rav Kahana, Huna. Was also a Reish Galusa. So there were a number of Reish Galusas that were great scholars as well. And it seems like this one must have been, somewhat of a scholar to get into a debate with Rava Bar Shmuel. Okay, so the Gemara that we learned yesterday, we mentioned that the first Gemara was about a continuation of Rava Bar Shmuel's statements. It mentioned a number of statements from Rava Bar Shmuel, and this one had to do with the laws of a person. Number one, a person making sure that he doesn't have other people talking negative about his children, and person has to be careful not to have any droplets of urine on his clothing, because people will say, oh, maybe he doesn't have a normal stream, and If so, he probably can't have kids, and if so, then his wife must have had a relationship with someone else while she's married, and his kids are not really his kids, and so that is, and therefore, a person. The Gemara says that Rav Bar Shmuel says in the name of Reb Chia, urine does not, a person doesn't totally empty his bladder unless he's sitting, because if he's standing, he's probably nervous that the urine won't, the urine might get on his, at the end of the stream, it slows down and it might get on his clothing, and then it could be a negative thing. Therefore, a person doesn't empty his bladder fully, which I guess is also probably a health issue as well, not fully emptying his bladder. And therefore, it says that sitting is a way around that. Now, Rav Kahana says that if you have afer tichuach, then you don't have to worry. You could stand and urinate in afer tichuach. In the afer is like some type of sand that's soft and it's able to absorb, so it doesn't spritz back. It doesn't, and then even standing is not a problem. And if you don't have afer tichuach, if you don't have this type of earth under you, then you could stand in a place that's high and urinate into a slope area so that it doesn't come back on. The droplets won't come back on the person. Then the next Gemara said that person should always eat salt and drink a lot of water. Eat salt after your food and drink a lot of water. Now, I don't know I guess the sodium, what the benefits of sodium, but I guess it has something. The Gemara here tells us, the Gemara brings a few places where it says this. There's a brisa this way. Rav Bar Shmuel says it. Then there's a brisa that says it, and the brisa adds in that it helps against reach hapeh, which is bad breath, and it helps against askara, which is a very serious sickness. So the question is, what's so bad about reach hapeh? It has to tell us in a Gemara how to get around reach hapeh. Unless maybe there's a health, maybe reach hapeh is not healthy to have a bad odor in one's mouth. That's what it would seem like from the Gemara, that it's making a statement. Maybe it's telling us that bad odor in the breath is, or maybe it's a halacha that a person shouldn't walk around with bad breath or learn Torah with a bad breath. That it definitely seems like reach hapeh is something that's that's more than just a little advice of how not to have bad breath. It would seem if the Gemara is mentioning it that maybe there's something more serious about bad breath. And and then the other thing is askara. Askara is a very serious sickness. It's a type of choking. Is considered the worst, the most painful death. Askara, and it's some type of a disease that starts in the intestines, and it somehow goes to the throat and causes some type of choking. So, and someone mentioned yesterday that's called diphtheria, I think. So, anyway, these are two things that it advises: salt and drinking a lot of water, and after you drink all different types of liquids, you should drink water. And we looked it up yesterday, and we found that in the Shulchan Aruch it mentions that this applied in the olden days when their food didn't have salt, and when their drinks did not have so much water or didn't have any water mixed in. And nowadays, the examples that were given, at least in the Mishnah gave two examples of the drinks that it spoke about: beer and mei dvash. Beer, he said that our beer has a lot of water in it, so it's not a problem. And mei dvash is, I don't know if you could buy it here in America, but they sell it in Israel. It's like a wine made from honey. And I guess nowadays they make it with more water. In the olden days, it was more strong. And the Gemara tells us you need to drink water afterwards. You should have you should make sure to drink water, which is interesting that it could be like, it could be that our Gemara is saying that fruit juices as well, a person should be careful, that fruit juices are not really as healthy as they make them out to be, and maybe really water is considered much healthier. I don't know if you want to take any lessons from it. The question is also, in the Mishnah Berurah brings this, that it's nishtana hativim, that it could be that nowadays our nature is different than it was in the olden days, and therefore we can't really follow the health advice here fully unless you see that the doctors find. It would be interesting for them to do research in this and look into it and see if they come up with anything similar. In other words, but we wouldn't necessarily rely on these health advice information unless the doctors of today would look into it and find that it's correct for our nature of today. Yes, Ben.
They didn't have running water at that time, so you didn't always have water in the house. You had other drinks. That's why they say you should drink water to wash it down or to dilute it.
So a lot of their food was undiluted. A lot of their drinks was undiluted.
Right.
Okay, good, nice. They probably didn't have salt like we have today either.
Maybe.
The easy to
Pantry.
buy salt.
They didn't have a pantry.
Preservatives.
What'd you say, Isaac?
The preservatives. They say nowadays when we get buried, it takes much longer for us to finish.
Oh, really?
Because of all the preservatives we have in our system.
From the food we eat.
You're talking about the
body decomposing.
I understand, but maybe it means the salt. Maybe it's from the salt. Physics. I mean,
pulling your leg, Rabbi.
We partake a lot of salt. What is that, Ezra?
He's pulling your leg.
No, he's serious.
I was very serious. This is years ago I heard this.
Right.
They got it from Egypt. They used to preserve the bodies.
Okay, so the next Gemara, and in the final Gemara that we learned yesterday was that person who floats his food in water, meaning he drinks a lot of water, he won't come to any choili ma'ayim, any intestinal sickness, any stomach sickness. And how much should a person drink? A ketone, a certain measurement, which we don't know, for pas, which also we don't know how big it's referring to, but a ketone for pas. Okay, so now let's start the next Gemara. Amar Rav Mari. We are, I would say, smack in the middle of the page, maybe about 25 lines from the top. Amar Rav Mari, Amar Rav Yochanan. We're on page 40a, about 25 lines from the top. Tanu Rabbanan hamakpe achilasa. No, 1 second. We did that. Amar Rav Mari, not Tanu Rabbanan. Amar Rav Mari, about 25 lines from the top. Amar Rav Mari, Amar Rav Yochanan haragel ba'adash. A person who often eats, is used to eating lentils. Achas l'shloishim yom, once every 30 days, meinea askara. He takes away this askara that Rashi says askara comes from it comes from constipation, and the adashim, the lentils, help loosen the person to be able to relieve himself. So the adashim is good once every 30 days, and it saves a person from this askara, which ultimately is this terrible sickness that causes death, and it's considered very painful, and it leads to choking. But the way Rashi explains it here is that it starts out with constipation. Yes, Ben. Oh, did you have a question? Oh, I thought I heard you. Okay. My name asked Mitoch Basic from his house. Now,
Rabbi.
Yes.
Did anybody say that the similarity of the word eskara to sakeret.
I
Which is
didn't see that.
diabetes.
But what is sakeret? Sakeret is diabetes. Is that from the word sukar, that you can't have sugar? Like,
Something like that.
interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Does diabetes, is it all connected to constipation, choking, or any of those things that it starts in the intestines and it goes up to the mouth, to the throat? Because that's the term here for the askara.
That I don't know.
Yeah.
Baruch
Thank
Hashem,
God I've
not
never-
by me in 35 years.
Okay, thanks for the practical side of this.
I think it reminds me more of acid, that some people have acid coming up to their mouth, to their throat.
Now, aval kol yoyma loy, but every day a person should not have lentils. My time, what's the reason? Because it causes a bad breath, and again, it seems from the Gemara like it's a very serious thing not to have bad breath. And the question is, I guess, also nowadays, do we find that naturally, in maybe in the time of the Gemara, it caused bad breath? I don't know that if a person has lentils, that it leads to bad breath in today's. So this might be another example of nishtanu hativim, where the nature of people has changed.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi,
Yes.
there's two causes of bad breath. One is locally, a person could eat something like a garlic or something, it gets in their teeth. And the second thing is that bad breath is a reflection of your intestinal health. If your intestines are not good and things are hanging around too long, your breath is going to smell. And it's not connected to what you ate or what you did eat, or you brush your teeth or you didn't. It's coming up from your stomach and from your intestines.
But it could be what you ate is causing that your intestines are not filtering the food properly. So
yeah,
it
but
could be that
if a person ate garlic and brushed his teeth, but you're getting the bad breath every day, whether you eat stuff or not eat stuff, then it's coming from your intestines and your stomach.
Right. No, I hear you. I'm just saying maybe thank you. That maybe explains the Gemara here, that it's saying that the lentils cause this bad breath. It means that they could have a negative effect on the intestines if you have it too often, and that would cause there to be the bad breath, the second option of bad breath that you mentioned, and that would mean that you're ruining, you're hurting, you're harming your intestinal health, and it's causing that type of bad breath. That we don't care if you drink a lot of, if you wash your mouth out with mouthwash a lot. The fact is that there is a bad breath coming from your intestines. So yeah, that's a good a good explanation to understand why the Gemara is so concerned about the bad breath. Okay, so V'amar of Mari, Amar of Yochanan, Haragal B'chardol. Then the Gemara says, person is usual to eat mustard once every 30 days. He prevents sickness from his household. But also every day a person shouldn't have mustard. The reason is a person shouldn't have it because it is bad for causes just lost the place. It causes a weak heart. So I don't know nowadays if they find mustard causes that, but I guess in the time of the Gemara it caused a weak heart. Now, Amar Reb Chia Barashi Amar Rav Haragal B'Dagim Katanim. If a person has small fish, often in a bali de cholim ayim won't come to a intestinal sickness, to a stomach sickness. Not only that, Ella, but shadagim katanim, but small fish are even good. They're mafrin, marbin. They cause a person to multiple to flourish to multiply. Umavrin kol guf.
Flourish.
What is the word?
Mafrin
say?
is to flourish.
Flourish.
The other one is to
Multiply.
increase.
Increase.
And Mafrin
Okay.
is to be healthy.
Thank you. So umavrin and
Clean is healthy.
bring healthy kol gufay shaladim, all the whole body of the person. So sounds like herring is a good. It was a healthy thing to have herring or sardines. Maybe that was the answer how we survived. Amar Reb Chama Reb Chanina. Reb Chama Reb Chanina says this is, I think, for Sephardic people. Haragel beketzach. Those that often have ketzach is fennel. I think Sephardic people often have
I don't know,
I
the
think it tastes like
dictionary,
arak. No, fennel. Does it taste like arak? Is that the?
the dictionary says black cumin.
Oh, really? Yours says the black cumin. Oh,
My
okay.
dictionary, yeah, I
Uh-huh.
looked it up in the dictionary.
So haragel ketzach ina bali de cave lave doesn't come to a pain in the heart. Doesn't come to heartache. Meisvei. The Gemara asks a question. Really, is ketzach good? Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says ketzach echad mishishim samani amavis. It's one of the 60 medicines of death, meaning they cause death. Echad mishishim samani hamavisu. V'hayoshin lemizrach gorana, a person who sleeps at the east side of his of the threshing floor, where they have the fennel. I have a note here on the side. 1 second.
It said black.
Where they gather all the fennel. The person who sleeps on the east side of it, damai baraishai, his blood is on his head, which means that he's guilty of his own death. Which sounds pretty serious, that it's a very dangerous thing to have fennel. So the Gemara answers, like kasha habarechai habataimai. There's a difference between smelling it. Smelling it is very dangerous, but eating it, tasting it is not a problem. And Imed Reb Yirmiyah Afyale Rifta, the mother of Reb Yirmiyah, used to make for him bread and umedabkale, and she would attach it to the bread with this fennel, and she would remove it from the bread. She would
This is fennel.
she would scrape it off or peel it off, and this way he would not smell it, which is because it's dangerous, but he would have the taste of it. So it sounds like the taste is, the Gemara is saying the taste of it is good, but the smelling of it is dangerous. Okay, now comes the next Gemara. Reb Yehuda Aimer, Bayre Mine Deshoim. The Mishnah. Now we go to the next line in the Mishnah. The Mishnah started out that the Reb Yehuda argued on the Tanakama. Reb Yehuda said, Bayre Mine Deshoim, on Yerakos, on vegetables or herbage, that the bracha would be Bayre Mine Deshoim. And we hold Bari Priha Adama, the Tanakama, like the first opinion, but Rabbi Yehuda says Bayre Mine Deshan, that you say a specific bracha on each type of vegetables. So now we're up to that next piece. Amar Reb Zera v'Itema Reb Chinana. So Reb Zera says, and some say Reb Chinana Bar Papa said, Ein halacha ke Reb Yehuda. The halacha does not follow Reb Yehuda. And the reason why they specifically say that is because the Gemara here brings a verse explaining Reb Yehuda. So because the Gemara is bringing a verse, the Gemara has to clarify and tell us, don't think that this verse is a absolute proof that it has to be this way. because it's not so. The rabbis, of course, the rabbis argue, and the halacha does follow the rabbis. So even though the Gemara is going to bring a verse, which we'll soon see, but even though the halacha automatically follows the rabbis, whenever you have Rabbi Yehuda arguing on the rabbis, there's an individual versus a majority of rabbis. The rabbis always, the halacha is always going to follow the rabbis, but the Gemara has to tell us that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda because the Gemara brings here a pasuk. So, my taima. So Reb Zera says, some say, Rav China bar Papa say, what's the reason to Reb Yehuda? My time is Reb Yehuda. What is his explanation? And it brings now a verse. Amar Kra. It says in the verse that Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, blessed is Hashem, day, day. And the initial understanding is the day versus the night. And so the Gemara says, or each day you should bless Hashem. The Gemara understands that it means by day and not by night. What, you don't bless Hashem at night? And so the Gemara answers, Ella, rather it means to say, every day you should give a me'ain, a fitting bracha for that day. So, for example, on Shabbos you bless Hashem what's fitting for Shabbos, and during the on Yom Tov you bless Hashem what's fitting for Yom Tov. And so each day doesn't mean day versus night. It means each day relative to the importance of that day, you should thank Hashem for the importance of that day, for the what that day means. And just like we see that each day should be specified, the bracha, so the same thing should be for foods. Rabbi Yehuda says you got to specify each type of vegetable, whichever category it falls in, you should recite. The Hachanami, the Gemara says here also regarding Brochos, kol min v'min, all types, all categories, tein loy me'ein Brochos, give Hashem what's fitting for blessing along what specific blessing for that item. And that's how Rabbi Yehuda learns that for certain types of vegetables, you would do barimine deshaim. And he had other types of another bracha, barimine zroim. And so Rabbi Yehuda follows this the way this idea that we use for bracha for that, just like it says Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. So he applies that to the laws of brachas. And now the next Gemara says, V'amar Reb Zera v'tem Reb China bar Papa. Reb Zera says, and some say Reb China bar Papa, come and see that Hashem acts differently than a human. And this is another statement from the same rabbis. That's the way the Gemara often does things. It often puts statements from the same rabbis. Once it says one, so it'll say a few things from that same rabbi. So here it brings another statement, and that is that Hashem is different than humans because midas basar v'dam, by a person of flesh and blood, we see by physical things, kli reikon machzik, a empty vessel holds things in it. Mole einay machzik, something that's full, you can't fit anything else in it. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu einay kain, but by Hashem, it doesn't work that way. Mole, a person who's knowledgeable, machazik, will be able to absorb more knowledge. Reikon, a person that doesn't have chachma, einay machazik, he will not hold on to what he learns. Shenemar, as it says, Vayomer Im Shamaya Tishma, if you look, Im Shamaya Tishma, if you surely listen to the voice of Hashem your God, and when the Yidden were in Marah, the Hashem said this pasuk. This pasuk was said to the Yid. Well, it was said by Moshe. Im Shema, if you listen, Moshe told the Yidden, if you listen to the voice of Hashem your God, and it was referring to, of course, the laws of Shabbos and the other laws that we were given paraduma, we were given in Marah. And it says, the end of the verse is, all the sicknesses that I put on Egypt, I will not place upon you. I believe that's the end, yes. Because I am Hashem, your healer. That's the end of that verse. So so we learn from there, it says a double language. Im Shamaya Tishma, Im Shamaya, if you listen to the Torah once, then Tishma, you will be able to hear again the Im Lav, and if not, if you don't listen the first time, Loi Tishma, you're not going to be able to hear. And what that means is that it's going to be harder for you. If you don't listen the first time, it's going to be harder for you to absorb it after. But if you do listen, so then it actually will be easier afterwards. And then the Gemara explains another explanation. Davar acher, another explanation is Im Shamaya b'yashan. If you learned, if you listened and reviewed to the old stuff that you learned, Tishma b'chadash, you'll be able to learn new things from the old things that you've learned. But if you don't do review, shuv like Tishma, you're not going to come up with new things from what you've learned. And so the idea that Reb Zera would, or Reb Chanina Bar Papa is telling us is that don't think that if you know a lot, don't think that you can't handle anymore. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. The more you learn Torah, the more you'll be able to handle. And the opposite is if you don't learn the first time, it's going to be much harder the next time around. So try to absorb, try to take everything that you learn the first time so that the next time will go easy. You'll be able to learn again. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for you. It's going to be hard for you.
A tough road.
A tough road. Okay, let's see. We got another minute. Let's do the Mishnah. The Mishnah. The
Rabbi.
Mishnah. Yes.
It's interesting. It doesn't say, it says if you turn your heart away. It doesn't say if you turn your ears away or if you turn your hearing away. It says if you turn your heart away, you won't be able to hear.
Uh-huh. So the way it's learning it here is it's explaining to mean review. And so I guess when it comes to review, it's not just maybe it's more that your heart is going to be fighting you from wanting to. Most people don't want to review. There's a big evil inclination telling you just learn more. So it's maybe I'm just throwing a thought that maybe it has to do with review is much harder, and it uses the term im yifne levavcha. That's a thought. I'll have to look in and see if anyone says anything on that. But
it says it doesn't say bechol shmiacha. You're listening. You have to have your heart in it. Otherwise,
yeah, no. But the first Gemara says im shamaya tishma im lav like tishma. Okay, the truth is, I guess over there also it doesn't say im leish shamata. Yeah, all right. It doesn't really. It's not like it contradicts the earlier Gemara. In other words, the terminology in the earlier Gemara also doesn't specify the second half. Im shamaya tishma, im lav le tishma. Here it says im shamaya b'chadash. Im yifna levavcha, it doesn't say im lav. It's just it says im yifna levavcha.
Rabbi, when they mention the heart, I think they mean if you listen. If
You know what
pay
it is?
attention.
I think the practical answer is that I'm sorry, I don't know what you said, Ben, but let me just say, I think the practical answer is im shamaya tishmaz, you're listening to someone else teaching. But review is you got to do yourself. So here it's not if you're not listening. It has to say if you're yifna levavcha and if you turn your heart away and you don't do review. That's in other words, it can't just say if not. The earlier Gemara said if not, meaning if you're not listening, maybe you and someone else is teaching. And here it's reviewing. So maybe that would I think that might be the simple answer. Yes, Ben, what did you say?
If you listen with your heart, it means you are really paying attention to what they are saying.
Uh-huh.
Not just hearing it and in from one ear and out the other, you know.
Right. But here it's talking about reviewing.
Yeah, if you review, you internalize it, what you heard, you know.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.